the U.S. central bank from the 1930s following the collapse of the stock market. And I wasn't in Tokyo, so I'm not responsible for anything related to the Abe-san assassination, which is so tragic, and God rest his soul. I mean, amazing human being. And now Draghi is it so something's going on, and it's probably bigger than we're going to get to on this show today, but it's big. And there are a couple others that need to clear out. You could get rid of Trudeau and Macron and a few others. But then who's going to get installed, right? And who's doing the installation? And I have this thesis on the U.S., right? When W was proximate to the Cheney presidency. No, he was the president. Yeah. Dick Cheney was the president, and W did a fine job. And I actually love W now. I think he's a great statesman. He's an artist and kind of a cool guy. Didn't really like him as president, but Cheney, I knew who to be afraid of. The problem is now, I don't know who to be afraid of, because it ain't the guy who's sitting in the chair, and it ain't the gal behind him. So it's somebody else, and that worries me. And so is that somebody else now pushing Bojo out and pushing Draghi out and setting the stage for something that I don't really... And here's a weird thing, and I don't want to freak people out, but just the other day, there was a commercial on New York television explaining what people should do if there's nuclear fallout. What? You're running an ad, like a television ad, telling people, and they said, oh, just go inside and you'll be fine. Really? That's what you're telling people? So that just freaked me out a little bit. And I don't think we're going to have a nuclear war. Let's hope not. But I thought it was just weird. And so there's a lot of strange stuff going on globally. It's a longer conversation. And look, I tend toward a belief that this has been going on for a long time, right? That this plan, and when I say this plan, meaning the plan of siphoning the wealth from the masses up to the few, right? The all-seeing eye pyramid has been going on for millennia. And you go all the way back to the 1600s with the first central bank, the Bank of the Netherlands, founded by the Rothschild family. And then 100 years later, the offshoot of the Rothschilds go over to England, set up the Bank of England, another central bank. And then 100 years later, this little colony breaks off. That's one of the things I love about traveling to, Europe or the UK is, I'm standing in Edinburgh in a building that's been standing since 1460. And I come back to a country that didn't even exist until 1776. And in 1913, we borrowed the model from the Bank of England and the Netherlands National Bank, Central Bank, to and we're in cahoots with the Rothschilds and a bunch of other wealthy families that create this entity that, through this illusion of price stability, which is a euphemism for I steal your wealth through inflation, that we've created a system that has been systematically boiling the frog, right? You put the frog in the pot, and if you turn the heat up slowly, they don't even know they're getting cooked, and then their muscles are paralyzed so they can't jump out. Where if it's really hot and you drop the frog in, they jump right out. So we've been being cooked for a long time. And the question, were we going down this path? Well, absolutely we're going down the path. Now, what about recession? Well, look, we had a really nasty recession in 2008, global financial crisis, in fact. And we pulled a playbook out of the 1930s called quantitative easing. QE was not invented in 2008, 2009. The Japanese have been doing QE, they call it QQE, for 30 years. And they're copying the U.S. central bank from the 1930s following the collapse of the stock market. And so why did we do QE back in the 1930s? Well, the United States was a banana republic, right? It was an emerging market run by gangs. If you've ever seen the movie Gangs in New York, right? It was not a really fun place to live in the late 1860s. And, in 1929, we went to one gang, right? In 1929, the Italian gang killed off the Irish gang, and there was no more Italian, Irish, it was just the Italians. And the mob ran the country and maybe some would argue still is running the country. And the interesting thing about it was we had this collapse, and the rest of the world looked at America and said, wait a second, you're an emerging market, you're run by a gang, you're not really that structurally sound, I'm not buying your debt, out. So who bought the debt? Central bank. So the central bank bought their own debt, created this thing called QE, cut interest rates to zero, and we had this zero interest rate policy up until 1937. And in 1937, we tried to raise interest rates from zero only by 25 basis points, and we prolonged, the depression and made things even uglier up until we had to go to war to fix it, which is how you fix economic, declines, is you go to war. Think about it. Like Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been occupied either by us or by Russia for a better part of a century. Why? Well, when you drop bombs in the middle of a desert or provide arms to combatants, that's good for GDP. Why was the first thing Trump did when he took office? Literally the first thing, I think it was in the first week, he sent 200 Tomahawk missiles into the middle of Syria. And remember, the thing is, he didn't hit anything. He wasn't trying to hit anything. He was just trying to send, a bunch of money to campaign contributors that, defense contractors. And so anytime you get really, really ugly, you're going to go to war. So shockingly, there's a conflict now, shockingly, because we were headed, to your point, on this path toward recession. But this is a long, winding tale of, in 2009, we restarted QE. And we basically erased the economic cycle. So from 2009 to today, we haven't had a recession, right? Why? We should have. We should have had multiple recessions, right? In 2015, 16, oil prices collapsed. We definitely were near a recession, but they bailed it out through QE2 and then ultimately QE3. And now what I'll call, ultimately we'll have QE forever. And Japan restarted QQE. They told us they would never buy any more Japanese government bonds in 2007. Now they're buying so many government bonds that their currency is just being destroyed. And everybody's like, oh, the dollar's so strong. No, it's not. It's less weak than the yen, which is down, almost 30% in the last 2 years, and the euro, which is down 20% over the same period. So the dollar looks strong by comparison, but the dollar relative to the renminbi is actually down. So there's a whole bunch of realignment that's going on. And now I'll go real deep into what people don't really want to talk about, which is, you asked the question, were we headed toward recession? Absolutely. Pre-COVID, things were slowing down. I will argue that weaponizing the flu, which is all it was, right? It was a flu virus. It was predicted in 2017 that we would have a flu virus, that it would be a pandemic, that it would start in late 2019, early 2020 because of decreased solar activity. People are like, Mark, what the hell are you talking about? If you think about how a virus is created, right? It actually comes down from the atmosphere, and the solar radiation kills most of them. But and solar radiation has peaks and troughs, right? Sunspots and solar flares and all that activity. And in 1360, we had the maximum low in solar activity, and we had the plague. Now, there are other reasons why the plague existed and why Edinburgh lost 1 million people and there's these mass graves. But it really started because the virus didn't get killed, and then it propagated and got spread through fleas and rats. But this virus was predicted. And here's the funny part. It was predicted to emanate in the mountainous regions of China. Why? Well, that's where the ozone layer is the thinnest and the stuff falls through and didn't get killed. So we have this virus, and it's a flu virus, right? And it mutates just like a flu virus. But what do we do? China, this is interesting, China exported propaganda and fear. Remember the original video of the guy falling over dead in the parking lot? But he put his hands out. Dead people don't break their fall, right? And then there was the one where they were spraying these people and catching them with butterfly nets, and you look around and it's a movie set. I mean, it's literally a movie set with actors. And, then they funded the Imperial College study that predicted that 2 million people were going to die in the United States. So one would argue that maybe there was a reason behind that. Well, why would anyone want to slow economic activity? Why would anybody want to break the supply chain? Well, look, if you were trying to create an alliance that goes from Southeast Asia all through China and India and Africa up into Europe and basically create another system that rather than the US dominated petrodollar system, maybe you would want to break things and make people more dependent on you. One theory. And so now what we've seen is US sanctions Russia. What does Russia do? Well, the ruble actually strengthens and people start buying oil from Russia in rubles or renminbi or in rupee, in rupiah in India, rupee in India, and rupiah in Indonesia. So why is that happening? Well, there's an alliance forming on that side of the world that if you intentionally slow, you can gain market share if you have liquidity. So who bought all the ports in Africa? China. Who bought all the ports in Greece? China. Who is bailing out Russia? China. And so that's an interesting dilemma that now we're faced, right, as the superpower. Mm-hmm. And that China's plan is to become the superpower, which I believe it is, by 2050. That's their stated goal. Then maybe this breaking of the supply chain, maybe it wasn't accidental. And maybe these government policies to lock down, which are going to turn out to be the dumbest policies in the history of policymaking, literally, right, to destroy economies. I don't know. It's all a very interesting dilemma. So to answer your question, Layah, were we headed for a recession? Sure. Was it made worse by the policies? Absolutely. But here's the real problem. Is everyone's talking about inflation. Mm-hmm. There's not inflation. Inflation is caused by excess demand relative to supply. Right. That's not what we have. What we have is currency debasement. In response to the lockdowns, the central banks, US, Europe, Japanese, printed gazillions, technical term, of currency. Here's a crazy stat. The United States has been a republic for 256 years. In the last 24 months, the Fed printed half of all the dollars that have ever existed. And why is it even called the dollars? Anyone know that?